The track is now open for practice. The track is now open for practice. For the Monroe Engineers, please come to run 63. For the Monroe Engineers, please come to run 63.
This is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the greatest proving ground for auto equipment anywhere in the world. How do I know? Well, I raced the 500-miler here a dozen years until I won it. My name's Sam Hanks. I've been a driver and years ago a mechanic, building and setting up my own race cars. I've run with some great drivers, and I've seen performances from some great cars. And the best performers are always right here on Memorial Day. All during the month of May, the boys are getting ready to run, and that's what's going on right now. Practice for the drivers, building and rebuilding for the mechanics. To run here, you've got to have a machine that can run the corners at 135 miles an hour and move through the traffic on the straightaways at 165. How do you do it? Well, not with speed alone. These cars have all the power they can use. The secret is car control. One of the most exciting stories of the last 10 years has been the increase in lap speed through better car control. That's the story I want to tell you. I'm a small part of that story. I had fun living it, and I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing it. We call it the Fast 50s. And I want to thank Monroe Auto Equipment for letting me tell it. The place to begin the story? Well, right outside the Speedway, within earshot of the cars going through the first turn, is the Speedway Museum. Many of these cars could run on the track today. Better fuels, lubricants, and improved tires would probably give them more speed than when they were new. But they simply aren't safe at the speeds we're running today. What's the big difference? Well, these cars all ran on friction-type shock absorbers. I've ridden friction shocks, and I'm glad I don't have to ride them again. Perhaps we can now understand what the mechanics have been searching for. Better ways of using engine power. Better methods of car control, especially in the turns. You might say the story of the last 10 years is in safer car control. Friction and lever-type shocks slowly disappeared, and Monroe direct-acting shocks took over. The first Speedway car designed for direct-action shocks came to Indianapolis in 1952. This chassis made history almost from the first day it ran. The car made a driver famous. Suppose we take a trip back in history and follow the story. The story that started with a new car and a driver named Bill Vukovich. Bill Vukovich could make that car run. He got his extra speed running through the corners. You see, all the boys are about equal on the straightaway, but in the corners, there's the real test of car control. Bill, on Monroe direct-action shocks, turned corners smoother and safer than any other car on the track. The others, using older type equipment, couldn't get the job done. Slow motion pictures show why. The left front wheel was off the ground. It's tough enough trying to get around that track on 4 wheels. On 3, you're scared half to death. Believe me, I know.
Welcome, race fans. This is the day you've waited for all year. Race Day, May 30th, 1952. We'll get you the lap-by-lap story of the race as it happens right from the trackside, and this, the greatest auto racing course in the world. They're coming off the 4th turn as the pace lap ends. And they're off. They settle into the groove. Vukovich is running the corners very well. He's moving past the competition on those corners. Bill Vukovich takes the lead. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been an action of racing second to none. Vukovich and his new car have a substantial lead.
In 1952, Vukovich had the race in his pocket, with only 10 laps to go. Then, Lady Luck took away all the chips. Vukovich brushed the wall when his steering gear failed.
He's against the wall, but he is not injured. Troy Rutten wins the 1952 running of the Indianapolis 500. He's going down.
Troy Rutten, a 22-year-old kid, came home first at the end of the 500 miles. The fans didn't know it then, but this equipment was all through at the Speedway. The boys behind the pit wall had seen direct action shocks almost win the race for Vukie. In 1953 and 54, form was proven. Bill Vukovich ran 1,000 miles and showed his tailpipe to all of us. Those two races were really something. I remember 1953, the heat was terrific.
It's a smooth, fast start. Vukovich, running from the pole position, grabs the lead. Temperature on the track is 130 degrees, and it's getting hotter. Carl Scarborough is in the pit after an hour on the track. He's giving up the car. He cannot take the heat. Others are giving up their cars to relief drivers. Van Hank, national champion, has asked for relief.
It was the first time I ever asked for relief in 20 years of racing. It was an afternoon full of trouble. Believe it or not, that fellow is still racing. And 2 years after this happened, he beat me to the finish line in the 500 by only 21 seconds. We'll get to Pat Flaherty's story in a minute. In 1954, following Vukie's lead, quite a few of the smart mechanics went over to Monroe direct action shocks. One of those mechanics was a fellow named Jack McGrath, and he made sure he did a good job because he drove that bus too. And did he drive it?
Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. A new one-lap record. 1 minute, 4 71 of a second. 141.
McGrath was the first man over 140 miles an hour, officially on that track. For years, no one could crack 140 until McGrath did it on direct action equipment. Vukovich had a new car in 1955. Lower, lighter weight, but built around the proven ideas of his winning car. During practice, a young mechanic named A.J. Watson watched, listened, and learned. Watson was chief mechanic for this car, built on the same principles as Vukovich's car. Bob Swaggart was slated to drive. We all rolled away smoothly in 1955. I started right next to Vukie and ran with him for the first few laps. Then a car struck the wall ahead of him, and Vukie was in real trouble. With the car across the track, another right beside him, Vukie had nowhere to go but over the wall. Swaggart, the car A.J. Watson prepared, won it. No longer was there any doubt that Vukovich and his race car had changed the way we ran at Indianapolis. A year later, with the wind behind him, mechanic A.J. Watson was ready to build his own car. Like Vukovich's machine, the engine was mounted to the side. The car was sprung with adjustable torsion bars, which allowed the mechanics to shift the weight from one wheel to another. Shock absorber engineers took all this in stride, working out the problems of car control during practice. When Qualification time came around. Pat Flaherty, remember him? The boy that leaned on the wall back in 1953? Set a new one-lap record at better than 146 miles an hour. Flaherty sat on the pole, inside front row. Fastest car in the race. Just about everybody had direct action equipment. You just couldn't make the race without them. Flaherty was going like gangbusters, and I wasn't far behind when my old friend Paul Russell started something in the first turn. I was one of those boys that spun after hitting another car that spun out of Russo's way. I broke a wheel, then an axle, and limped around. After a pit stop, I was dead last.
In the pits, his car is all right. He's going on. He's going back in the race. Let's give him our real send-off, fans. Lap 198 goes on a zinc signboard for driver Pat Flaherty.
Before the race was over, I'd worked my way back to second place, and I finished only 21 seconds behind Flaherty. In 1957, Lady Luck finally got on my team. My mechanic, George Sally, designed a wonderful new car with a big difference. George took the old faithful Offenhauser engine, built by Meyer and Drake, that normally stood in an upright position, and laid it on its side. George said an engine doesn't know which way it's standing. Well, it wasn't so easy as that. There's a million problems to be licked, some in the engine and some in the chassis. But when she rolled from the garage, I sure was riding the most different car on the track. Only 22 inches high at the hood, lighter in weight, and I hope faster through the turns. I wasn't taking any chances. If I dented this one, George and I both would sit out the race. George had all his savings and a mortgage on his home running with me. I took those turns mighty careful. In the race, it was a different story. Go for broke.
200,000 people are on their feet as the green flag turns them loose. After 30 laps, Sam Hanks is closed in on the no-by. If Hanks can pass that no-by, he can pass anybody. And in the turns, Hanks is passing. That car is working wonders for Sam Hanks and for its designer, George Sally. Hanks is in the lead and holding it. Hanks takes the checkered flag. Sam Hanks wins the Indianapolis 500 at record speed. The mechanics and pit crews of all the cars entered are lining the pit wall to greet Hanks as he rolls in. And they're waving. They are actually cheering for the man who beat him. He's in a victory lane. And ladies and gentlemen, I believe Sam Hanks is...
That car could run the corners like it was on rails. Those wheels stuck. And I won. Same engine, new chassis, direct action shocks. That's the story. 1957 and the end of my career behind the wheel. I had raced in 12 500s, and I had done what I wanted to do, win the big one. George Sally had a winning machine, and a year later he got himself another driver. Jimmy Bryan had been national champion 3 times, and he wanted to win this 500 almost as bad as I had. A.J. Watson wasn't standing still either. In 1958, he built 3 machines that were the fastest of all qualifiers. And these 3 machines started in the front row for the race.
Tremendous duel for the lead between Ed Elysian and Dick Rathman. Elysian is leading into the 3rd turn, but he's in trouble. There are cars spinning all over the racetrack. Look out! Pat O'Connor flips. angle. And some of them are damaged by collision. The tremendous speed generated along the backstretch makes it almost impossible to slow down in time to avoid the wreckage on the third turn.
The worst pileup in Speedway history knocked out 13 of the best cars. Watson's first row was badly damaged.
But we've learned that many cars at the front of the field, including the fast machines built by A.J. Watson, are out of the race. The first car through that pileup without damage was Jim Bryan in car number 1.
When the track was cleared, the race went on, with Jim Bryan in my old car battling his way to the checkered flag.
There's the checkered flag for Jim Bryan. George Sally has a winning car. That's 2 in a row for Sally's Sidewinder. It was a tremendous show.
George Sally's terrific little machine had won 2 in a row. But Watson wasn't a fellow who discourages easily. Wreck one of his cars and he just builds another. So, in 1959, Watson put the finishing touches on a real beauty. Roger Ward sat behind the wheel. There was plenty of good machinery facing Ward. Johnny Thompson had a machine like my old one, with the engine laid flat. And that Sidewinder of Thompson turned laps at 145 miles an hour in traffic.
And Johnny Thompson in number 3. Ward's car, built by A.J. Watson, seems to handle just a bit better, although the fastest single lap goes to Johnny Thompson's Sidewinder. Coming up to the checkered flag, Roger Ward is first, running with a new record. In second place, Jim Rathman, driving another Watson creation. And right behind Rathman is Johnny Thompson. This race run at a new record speed of better than 135.
Roger had run the entire 500 miles faster than our best one-lap speed when I first qualified at the Speedway. That's what car control can do. The boys were using smaller engines. New rules had cut piston displacement, yet they were running faster. And this is important. All 33 starters used Monroe direct action shocks.
Okay, Sam, I gotta go to work.
Well, have a good ride, Roger.
Thank you.
Take care of that machine.
I'll try to.
Okay, boy. Well, that's history, and some little-known facts behind history. Most people don't realize that races are won right here in the garages. They only know about accidents and about records set and broken. And they ask, well, what's that got to do with me? I don't drive a race car and I don't travel 150 miles an hour. Well, what happens at Indianapolis has a lot to do with you. The boys here in Gasoline Alley are solving a customer's problem, just like any service station operator. The customer wants a safe, dependable, controlled ride. Monroe gives him that ride. These Monroe Shocks are the same Monroes you get in your service station. They have been improved and tested right here at the world's toughest proving grounds. That's probably the reason half the shock replacements sold in service stations are Monroe. Perhaps we ought to take a close look at what a shock absorber really does. It does 3 things. First, it prevents side sway. This car has worn-out shock absorbers. Even low-speed turns can be dangerous. Now, watch how Monroe equipment keeps the car level and under control during the turn. If this were all a shock absorber did, control the car during turns, it would be great. But it does a lot more. Watch. A weaker old shock absorber lets the wheels bounce even on smooth highways. Each time the tire comes down, a small amount of rubber is torn away by the bite of the pavement. Result, shorter tire life and the possibility of tire failure. Even that's not all a shock does. They help you stop, surely and safely. When you jam on the brakes work all right, but with weak shocks, the car keeps right on going. You can't control your car when your wheels are off the ground. You risk your life on bad shock absorbers. The next time you hear about an accident caused by poor brakes or a slippery surface, remember it might have been the shock absorbers. State police have said so many times. I've driven in a lot of races and on a lot of highways. Believe me, the average race driver is a bug on safety compared to Mr. Motorist. His life and livelihood depend on safe performance. Now, a race driver wouldn't sit behind the wheel of many passenger cars on the road today. A good mechanic is doing his customers a favor when he suggests a new set of Monroes to replace worn equipment. Shocks are worn out by 25,000 miles, so keep an eye on the mileage indicator and check those shock absorbers. There's one more thing I'd like you to know before we watch the running of this year's 500. It has to do with heavy work, such as a loaded station wagon, or a sedan with 3 pieces of luggage, some golf clubs, and 3 adults in the back seat. And you know what happens. The rear end begins to sag more and more and more as the weight is put over the rear wheels. The tailpipe often scrapes the driveway. The car is heavy and sluggish. Your seat is tipped back in an uncomfortable driving position. And at night, your lights shine up into the air and into the eyes of the fellow coming the other way. And every time you round a curve, the rear end sways and lurches dangerously. And what can you do? Well, it's simple. You install load levelers. Load levelers are heavy-duty shock absorbers working inside a heavy-duty coil spring. And these 2 units are calibrated to work together under load. Yet they do not disturb the car's balance when the load is removed. Now, your car is guaranteed to ride on an even keel. It will take rough bumps without bottoming. There's real stability on tight curves, and you'll like the improved steering and longer tire life that real car control gives you. Load levelers, another example of better ride control, patented by Monroe. Now it's time to see the 44th running of the world's greatest auto race, the Indianapolis 500. I'll be busy during the race, but I'll see you again when it's over.
Race day, May 30th, 1960. The beginning of a new decade of automotive development. The cars are rolling from the pits to the starting line as the greatest crowd in racing history packs the giant arena. To hear again those historic words, "Gentlemen, start your engine." With Sam Hanks, director of competition, looking on, Tony Holman, Speedway president, issues that ringing command. The cars are beginning to move off the old brick straightaway. All 33 starters are underway, moving down the first turn to begin the pace lap that will send them on their way the next time they hit the starting line on the front stretch. "200,000 heads are watching the north turn as the cars wheel out of the turn onto the front stretch, gathering speed. And here they come. They're racing. Roger Ward cuts across the track to position 1. The battle is on. Safely through turn 2, stringing out, each man finding his own groove for the 500 miles. It's a 3-way fight up the backstretch. Ward in the lead. Eddie Sachs battles his way to position 2. Jim Rathman right behind him. Eddie Sachs challenging at the end of lap 1. Sachs passes to take the lead. And if that first lap is any indication, he's going to have his troubles keeping the lead. In a blazing duel, that lead changes 16 times in the first 100 laps. The crowd yells itself hoarse, watching the greatest competitive show the Speedway has ever seen. The pit stops are fast, sometimes too fast. Don Branson comes in too hot, yet he keeps that car in competition. Pit stops are vitally important. Some crews have practiced hours to cut the time it takes to refuel and change tires to less than 20 seconds. But Eddie Sachs, pole winner and an early leader, won't be on his way in that amount of time. Steering trouble, then magneto failure, forces him to give up the chase. Sachs joins the other early front runners, Troy Ruttman, Tony Bettenhausen, and Jim Bryan. He's out of the race with mechanical failure. Then, the big pit stop. Roger Ward and Jim Rathman roll in for tires and fuel less than 1 second apart. These two have battled each other from the first lap. Ward won this race a year ago, but Rathman, driving number 4, was a close second. He's been second 3 times in his speedway career, and he's mighty tired of it. Ward is on his way in 20 seconds. Smokey Unick, Rathman's crew chief, hears the roar of Ward's engine and slams down the lid on Rathman's gas tank. Let's get this boy out of here. The crowd lets loose a tremendous roar. This may become the greatest show in speedway history. On the backstretch, Rathman closes in behind Ward. They're near top speed, but throttle down for the third turn. Now they're traveling. Smokey Unick and the crew are standing on the wall, and here they come off the 4th turn, howling down the straightaway. Ward is leading, but Rathman keeps his foot in it, driving straight for the wall at 145 miles an hour. Rathman passes. He's in the lead. A.J. Watson, Ward's mechanic, is up against tough competition. Himself. Watson built that race car that Rathman is driving. Here they come. And Ward, with a tremendous burst of speed, takes back the lead as he sweeps past Watson and his pit crew. On the backstretch, Rathman again drives deep into the corners, long past the point where they usually slow down, and takes position 1 again. Ward pulls even. Not enough. Rathman grimly plants his foot down and turns a lap at 146 miles an hour to keep the lead. Rathman is turning the fastest laps in competitive history. For 50 laps, they battle it out. Low on fuel and nearly out of tires. Together, they come down to the white flag. 1 more lap. Rathman leading. At last, Ward slows down. If you can't catch the front runner, there's no use hanging it on the wall. Jim Rathman, the bravest man on the racetrack, takes the checkered flag. Ward, his tires already worn through 2 layers of fabric, takes the checker less than 13 seconds behind the winner. Rathman immediately slows down to save his own tires. Tires that had no more than 2 laps left in them. Rathman's crew is wild. His car owners, in their first attempt at the Speedway, have romped home with more than $110,000, the winner's share of the Speedway's record-breaking purse of $369,000. Here's the winner. A 31-year-old maker of go-karts and operator of a speed equipment shop in Miami, Florida. This was Jim Rathman's 11th race, almost 5,000 miles in competition, and now one of the biggest money winners in racing history. Every major record in the Indianapolis racing book was broken. Jim Rathman's winning time is almost 3 miles an hour faster than Roger Ward's record set a year ago. Questions of design still have to meet the final test at this greatest of all proving grounds. Of the first 10 cars to finish, 5 were stand-up and 5 lay-down engines. No question, however, on shock absorbers. The first 10 and all others running at the finish were equipped with Monroe shock absorbers. And every track record in the last 10 years has been set with Monroe shock absorbers. The choice of drivers and mechanics on the greatest racetrack in the world.